Hello, I'm Tracy Lee, an architect with the firm Eskew Dumez Ripple based in New Orleans. And I'm a volunteer member of the American Institute of Architects Contract Documents Committee. I'm in my 6th year with the committee. And here with me today are 3 other members of the committee and one of the staff attorneys from the organization. I ask you all to introduce yourselves in the order I see you on my screen. Sal, first.
Well, good day, everyone. Thanks for attending. And my name is Sal Verastro. I'm the technical managing partner with Spillman Farmer Architects. We're based out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I'm also in my 6th year on the EA Documents Committee and volunteering my time for these very, very valuable documents.
And Tara?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tara Myers, and I'm an architect with the firm of Earl Swenson Associates in Nashville, Tennessee. And this is my 5th year on the committee, serving with these wonderful people that you see on the screen here, and look forward to talking with you guys more this morning about the contracts that we're working on.
And Mr. Maxwell?
Hi, I'm Guy Maxwell. Glad to be here with you today. I'm a partner at Enniad Architects. We're based out of New York and also have an office in Shanghai. And I've been on the committee for 4 years and glad to be here.
And Sarah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Bauer. I am counsel and manager at ACD Operations.
So we've been working together on a task force, a kind of a subcommittee of the documents committee that's been assigned to study and analyze the situation that's becoming more and more common in current professional practice, where there are 2 architects working for the same client on the same project. And the goal is to produce for the AIA a set of standard agreement forms that support this situation, this condition. We want to try to assure the client that they're getting a full, complete, comprehensive set of services from the 2 architects with no scope gaps and as little overlap and duplication as possible. And we want to try to make sure as much as we can to set up a framework where all 3 parties, meaning the 2 architects and their common client, understand before the project begins what everybody's expectations are, how the responsibilities will be allocated, and who's doing what when, essentially. So today, this morning, we're going to start by discussing some of the fundamental issues and concerns that we came across in our analysis of this condition that we are using as some of the underpinnings as we construct the contract language. And I think to start, really kind of the obvious question that I'm going to put on the table for the panel is why does this situation happen? Why would a client choose to hire 2 separate architects for the same project? And I know, Tara, your firm has a lot of experience working collaboratively with other architects, so let me ask you to be the first respondent.
Sure. Thanks, Tracy. And I'll just talk about 2 of the most common ways I see it in our firm. One of those is where one of the architects is more specialized in a certain area of design, perhaps, than the other firm that's brought to the table. And we work, we often, where we see multiple firms coming together on a project is where we have more of a large project or a more complex project. And we do this a lot in the healthcare world, where maybe one of the architects has more experience with healthcare design or is maybe a lab planner, and also in the hospitality world, where you've got architects that really specialize in one aspect of that design. And the other area we see it is where one of the firms is more local. And so they've got the local experience with the AHJ, and they know how they're going to deal with local codes and processes. And so a lot of times they'll partner an out-of-town architect with somebody that's more local to that region.
Okay, thanks for that. And Guy, let me ask you to add. I know your firm, Enniad Architects, is sort of famous for doing this kind of collaborative work all over the country and all over the world. Can you talk a little about your experience in working with other architects? And sorry, Guy, you're on mute.
Sorry. I'll start by saying, first for us, this is not a new form of project delivery. We have been doing this for quite some time. I think it was general sense of the AIA and certainly of our committee that we are seeing these types of collaborations more and more frequently these days. I would echo what Tara's saying is more often than not for us, it's on a project of a certain size and complexity. I think another trend that really is driving more owners to look to this is an increased need for specialization and expertise, and clients perceiving that they can actually get a better set of services from two specialists as opposed to one firm. We certainly have that, end up in situations like that quite a bit when we have a depth of expertise in, say, performing arts or in healthcare, in higher ed. For us too, we practice, and I think it's interesting that there are kind of multiple types of firms that engage in these types of services. I think there are some firms that really focus more just on design, and routinely will collaborate with AOR firms. There are other firms that focus more on being the AOR and production, and there are other firms that continue to be generalists. I would categorize our firm in the latter group, but from time to time, a client might have a particular need, or we see a strategic reason at the outset to get a project by teaming with a local architect. When we have these collaborations, it's usually, as Tara mentioned earlier, for the geographic component. The client wants a design firm like ours, but also wants to work with a local firm as the AOR.
Yeah, and I think that's a common way that this kind of pairing happens. Sal, I know your firm, like mine, is a little smaller than the other two. Do you have much experience in this kind of teaming situation?
Well, percentage-wise, compared to Tara and Guy, probably not. But I will echo a couple of those things, and I think Guy brought the one to the forefront. For us, we're on the flip side. We might get asked to be the architect of record, the AOR, as Guy has said, because we're the local firm. We have a good relationship, an established relationship with a local company, and they want to use us as the architect, but we might not have the design experience or the portfolio in that particular project, as Tara said, type of project, whether performing arts or something, a science lab or something like that, and where we would team up with firms like theirs, or the owner might actually go out and reach out to them as well and marry us two together, which is perfectly fine and happens often. The other thing that we find as a smaller firm compared to the people on this video is that manpower. The project might demand more manpower than we actually have. And we might be capable of doing the project from a design standpoint, but we just don't have the manpower because of the size of the project. So we would reach out to somebody like them who would add to that manpower, but also have maybe more design experience than we have. And we find that, being a small firm, that's probably the more prevalent way that we get involved in projects like this. But it is not certainly uncommon, and we actually see a trend going upwards for a firm like ours. And one last thing I want to add is one we have found dramatically increasing in the past 5 years is we have to team up with groups who offer entities we don't have, the governmental requirements, as like minority or small business requirements. We don't have that in-house. We might team up with an entity who can provide those, like on VA projects, or the ones that we've been getting involved in, more technically oriented, but certainly still viable.
And Sal, both you and Guy alluded to a situation that happens sometimes where the teaming is done even before the client is known, or before you have the project, when you're in the process of trying to win the project and be competitive. I know our firm sometimes chooses to team up with another architect to present to a potential owner or client a complementary set of skills. Maybe, as Tara said, maybe the other architect may have a strength that we don't have, or we may have a client relationship, but we need the design expertise of a firm like Guy's to help us win the project. And so sometimes this is the client's decision, but there are times when it's actually the architect's decision to pair up with another architect. And Sal, I'm really interested to hear you say that you see this as a trend that's starting to happen. Can you talk a little more about that?
Sure. I think because of a lot of regulations, it has to be a trend in my mind, because some of the clients that we come across, there's just no one firm that can provide all those requirements, whether they're governmental or just internal. And at least in my book, you can't, in my mind, a smaller firm, that is, we can't sustain a staff that has those specialties and still be viable. It just doesn't pay us to have those people on staff, where a larger firm can do that, but they may be out of town. As you know, Guy said, he has one office in New York and one overseas, of course. That may an owner. We tend to think owners want to stay local as much as possible. So it is. I think it's more prevalent today, as everyone wants to be green and stay local and keep the money local. We hear that a lot, and so that, and good and bad. But I have to say that I think you said a key word before, complementary. You have to have respect for those firms, and you have to throw the egos out the door, particularly the people on this call. I mean, we have tremendous respect for their capabilities, and particularly in design, and that goes a long way in having a good marriage on a project like this. So when you do that, you have a successful project. The recipe is great.
Tara, to turn back to you, you mentioned the healthcare projects where you're frequently teaming with a kind of what you might call a specialist firm that has some of the expertise, like Sal is talking about, that you all may not have as a strength. What is the kind of relationship that you have with that second architect? Is it someone who's, as Guy said, is it kind of like a forced marriage where the owner says, we want you two architects who may not know each other well to work together, or is it someone that you seek out and work with as a consultant? What's the relationship like between the two architects?
Well, it can really happen both ways. So our firm, we do probably 70% of our work is healthcare, and we do it across the country. But even, I don't consider us a large firm. We have about 185 people. So when you have the bigger, 2,000 plus firms out there, we're still in that smaller size range, and we specialize in healthcare, but we then need specialists, say, in lab planning, or even, more finite specialties that are out there in the market. And also just the scale of some of these projects. When you have a project that is pushing upwards of, several $100 million, $1 billion, and with multiple buildings on a campus, having one firm do that can be very challenging. So a lot of times we will strategically partner, as Sal and Guy have said, early on in the process when we're pursuing the project. We'll either partner up with firms that we know either have a good relationship with the owner or have other skills that they bring to the table, or even just that bandwidth that Sal talked about. Or there are times when a client may have somebody that they work with on a regular basis, and they've brought them in to do one element of the design, and they will partner us up in as Sal said, a forced marriage. In those instances, I think Sal's right dead on. You want to make sure that the firm's cultures jive, and that there's going to be some good abilities for you to collaborate and not step on each other throughout this process, because it really is a process where you need to work hand in hand with the other architect in most instances, and really both be there to serve the client as a single team.
And Tara, as a follow-up, you mentioned two different situations, one where you seek out a partner and another where the client wants you to work with someone that they have experience or confidence in. What are they your consultant, or how does the contractual relationship work?
Typically, especially if we pull this team together, the owner is looking for a single source of contract. So we will either we'll decide early on. We put together teaming agreements with these partners even before we're pursuing the project, to kind of understand who's going to play what role and who's going to work for who. Those are really important discussions to have early on in the process. There are times, and not so much in the healthcare world, we've done some projects more in the arts and community realm with performing arts centers, where the owner brings in one architect and they hire them, and then they'll bring us in under a separate contract, and as we'll be the architect of record, and both parties will work for the owner under prime agreements. So it happens both ways, but I'd say in our experience, more often than not, we are hiring the other architect or they are hiring us as a consultant.
And Guy, in your practice, in your experience, do you agree with that? Is that the way it predominantly happens with your firm?
Yeah, not 95% of our work, the client wants a single contract obligation with single architect, and then one architect is hiring the other. And we've functioned in both ways. We're virtually in every instance we're acting as a design architect. But in some instances, we've actually been the design architect as well as the AOR with a local. And I will say, on those situations when an owner wants us to partner with someone locally, that can be for a variety of reasons. I think it was mentioned, buying local and wanting to make sure that some of the fee dollars that get expended on a project are going to local firms to support local business. That can be important on public projects or projects with very high profiles. But also, oftentimes, the local architect is going to have a better knowledge of the local regulatory environment. The local jurisdictions, they might have familiarity with the process for a zoning review, or might have a reputation with the zoning board, which can be beneficial to a client. But again, there are multiple ways to set it up, but in our experience, most of our clients prefer a single contract.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will add, that one of our other committee members is a commercial developer, and I think it's important to point out situations where there are many clients who build regularly and repeatedly who look to this model because they have a go-to design firm that knows their standards, knows how they like their building. They derive a lot of benefit from not having to form and forge a new relationship with from the design perspective with an architect, and will use that architect repeatedly, and then might go to various other AORs for the reasons that we've mentioned.
And that's similar, I think, to the situation that Sal talked about, where sometimes you may be asked to be the so-called local representative because of a specialized knowledge of jurisdiction requirements, or maybe even some political connections. When you have that kind of structure and you're working with an architect that maybe you're not that familiar with, and any new business relationship is always sometimes it can be a little frightening or scary. What steps do you take to try to understand how to anticipate what might happen working with somebody you've never worked with before, where you're jumping into the deep water together and you've got to deliver a project on time and on budget, and so there's a kind of a codependency there. What steps I'll ask Guy to follow up. What steps do you take when you're working with someone you haven't dealt with before?
Well, we rarely end up in a forced marriage. It happens occasionally, but more often than not, we're on the front end of forging a team to pursue the project. And there we do our due diligence. We look for a firm that has a similar design sensibility. For us, design doesn't end when we put down our pencil and they pick up theirs. Not literally these days, but since we all work in CAD, but we need a firm that we know can realize the design intent and see it through all the way through construction. So it's really about finding the right kind of fit and sensibility. And like any kind of work, you have to have a level of trust directly with the people who you're going to be working, and that's really important. And so just the general fit is what we focus most on.
Which goes back to what Sal was saying, is that when you're working collaboratively with someone, whether by choice or not, you've really got to trust and try as much as you can to get the egos out of the way and work productively together Guy, it sounds like you've had some great experiences through your career, but I think all of us have stories about experiences that are not so great. So maybe, Tara, we can talk a little bit about what are the potential problems or pitfalls or things to look out for or be aware of in entering into a business relationship, especially if it's someone you haven't worked before, but in some cases, even if it is.
Definitely. And so I had an attorney tell me once that, and this goes for clients or with consultants or particularly with working with another architect, that the contract negotiation phase is kind of like that dating period. And it's going to tell you whether you guys are right to be married at the end of this, this endeavor. And so really having those initial discussions and understanding how you're going to work out the structure, who's going to do what, and the fees is one of the early things that has to happen, and it's critical. You can really tell a lot from that phase on how people get along and how they're able to collaborate during that. That tells a lot about how maybe the rest of the project's going to go. So, and really just understanding how you're going to divide this up, because as you said earlier, Tracy, the biggest goal is to make sure that we provide a unified set of services for this owner without overlapping too much and without having gaps and holes where there's finger pointing at the end of the day, where somebody says, well, I didn't have that in my fee, and the other person says, well, I didn't have it, and then the owner's left with, holding the bag saying, well, I'm not getting complete services. So I think the biggest pitfall that we see is just making sure that you've got everything covered and that you're going to be able to work together to collaborate to provide that full set of services to the owner.
And Sal, you talked a little about being sort of what I'll call the little guy when the 2,000 person firm calls you up and says, we're doing a project in your area and we've heard you're a good, competent architecture firm and we want you to be our boots on the ground. What happens then? How does the relationship build from there?
That's a great question, and I want to echo everything that Guy and Tara said, and Guy said something interesting before that I want to touch on related to your question, it's very assuring to hear that he's had some great relationships and projects, and because you work with the same people pretty much all the time, which is great. On the flip side, being the small guy, we don't have that capabilities all the time, but I think the first thing we do is, I think Guy touched upon it, is that you have to have mutual respect for each other, and there's a trust factor involved, and you have to explore that possibility up front. And Terry kind of mentioned that you have to kind of date a little bit and find out what you're all about. If design is important to you and it's not important to your partner, you've got a problem right up front. If they're just there to collect a fee and do some work, it's probably not a good marriage. And so you have to have the desire to work together, basically, is what it comes down to. And that's what we look for right off the bat. If that's missing, you're going to have problems. And sadly, and I hate to say this, but we have had issues because we're sometimes in a forced marriage, and we jump into the hoop, so to speak, head first and without doing some due diligence, which is shame on us, right? But we have to, I think the first thing we look for is what are the strengths of the companies together. If we're both strong in the same area and both weak in the same area, that doesn't do either one of us any good, and that's a big problem. So we look for, the word before was complementary. We look at a complementary firm, and we're honest with some big firms that come to us, and we have the manpower and the bandwidth, but we just don't think we're a good fit, and we've turned down projects like that. And some maybe we should have, but for the most part, I hate to say this, but we look for egos. If anybody has an ego and they're not checking them at the door, I'm sorry, we're not interested, because we don't do that kind of thing. We keep your eye on the ball. The thing is to do a great project for the client and get paid for it. We're not saying we do it at a reduced cost. Lack of communication is the biggest problem. Of course, it's the biggest problem inside the office. Why wouldn't it be the biggest problem outside the office, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what we've seen. Tara's right. You got to date a little bit and do some homework up front.
I would echo what Sal's saying too, just to stress this point. I mean, our best collaborations have been founded on mutual respect and trust. Everyone has to understand their role, and I agree with Tara. It starts with clear expectations and a clear contract. But then at the end of the day, we're very focused on client service, and we expect to be able to work things out amongst ourselves without having to have the client adjudicate every little squabble that might happen, and they happen on every job. It's to be expected. But at the end of the day, you've got to trust and respect the people that you're working with, and have a clear process for how you get through those challenging points in the road. And again, having a clear management structure, having clear communication, and most firms are well prepared to do that. I mean, even an architect working by themselves might have on a complex project. For us, we might have 15 or 20 consultants. So we know how to work collaboratively. We know how to manage large groups of individuals, who have to have a focus for their work that fits into a larger whole. And it's no different working and partnering with another architecture firm.
I'm going to add on to that real quick, Tracy, and I think that Guy brought up a good point there. And even if you're working separately, you're both working independently for the owner, I think you have to act as if you're working under the same contract, in that you're just as if you're not going to throw a member of your own team under the bus and point fingers. You want to have that same relationship with the other architect, even if you're both independent contracts. I think, like Guy said, you need to have the trust and the ability to work together and solve problems, and sometimes do that independent of the owner, where you guys are going to work things out and make sure that it's going to be in the best interest of the project, not necessarily in the best interest of your independent firms.
Yeah, all of us here today have used words like complementary skills, full set of services, client satisfaction, no scope gaps. So that really seems to be something that's very important in this concept of a couple of architects working together, whether they're related contractually or not. And when our group was first getting together, kind of beginning our analysis of this, we called on what resources we had and talked about our own internal experiences. And almost every firm that works in this way has some form of what I'll call a responsibility matrix, where there's a written document that tries to allocate responsibilities between the two architects, so that everybody's clear, including the client, on who's responsible for what. What's your feeling about that, Tara? Is that something that your firm uses, or have you developed something like that?
We have, and like you said, they come in a lot of different flavors, and we've used varying ones on different projects. And I think that was one of the things that our task group really had to take into consideration as we started this process. And they can get really, really minute and in the weeds and into the details, which I think on certain projects you need, or in some cases you really you need to make sure you're covering the big buckets and that you've got all of the big things taken care of before you can talk about who's going to write the meeting minutes during the schematic design phase kind of thing. So I think that's one of the things we tried to do as a group when we looked at this, is how do we follow the basic outline of an AIA document, where one architect is following, a process of services that they're providing for the owner, and how do you take that and then divide that up into between two architects and make sure that there are no gaps and holes. And I think that's the purpose of any responsibility matrix, whether you take it very, very detailed or you start at the top and look at the big buckets, is to just make sure that you're making sure that the owner is getting a complete set of services.
And is that something that you share with the owner? Do they see that? Or is this a behind the scenes kind of thing? I'm talking about the circumstance where the second architect is your consultant and doesn't have a primary relationship with the client.
If the other architect is under our contract or vice versa, a lot of times the owner does not see that. That's kind of the details that I think they don't really care about. They've got one prime agreement with either our firm or the other firm, and they are expecting a full set of services, and how we accomplish that is usually, they don't care. They just say, as long as you're getting that done, you guys can manage that in whatever manner you want. I do think if there are two primes, they may care more, just to make sure that they've got their bases covered, and that they're seeing that kind of the proof is in that document. They can see it on paper that it's been allocated between the two firms.
Guy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll say on the flip side, we have a lot of clients who are very interested in understanding exactly who's doing what, even when one owner is going to hold the contract. In many instances, they appreciate the complexity of having two architects on the project, and to some extent they want to hear it from both of them that they are going to work together, as we've been talking about, in a complementary manner. So we usually have to go into a certain level of detail about exactly who's doing what. And one of the reasons for that is, I would say on almost all the projects in which we collaborate this way, we are working shoulder to shoulder from the start of the project through the end of the project. And each firm has different roles. If we're in the design architect role, we're going to have the primary responsibility in the early phases, but the AOR is going to be there advising the client, getting in on the ground floor to understand the project goals and objectives. More often than not, we'll have them responsible for code from day one and advising on code, which means that they have, more than just a casual knowledge of how the design's developing. And so given that kind of blending of services across all the phases, and in the later phases in CDs, we're really starting to take more of a backseat. Our role is more of periodic reviews to make sure that the design is developing into CDs consistent with the design intent. And we're usually even there during construction, reviewing key submittals, mock-ups, sample submissions, etc. So, the architect, the owner really wants to understand, I'm going to be seeing both of you from start to finish, and I really want to understand who's responsible for what throughout that continuum.
And that's certainly one way to do it, and it sounds like you all have had a great deal of success with that. I know our group found in our research, though, that there are circumstances where the owner will hire, let's say, a design architect, give them a contract for an exclusive set of services that ends at some point, and then hire a separate architect, say after the basic schematic or advanced design work is done, and expect them to be the ones to do the permitting and entitlement and construction documents and carry it through and oversee the construction contract administration. Those are kind of the two classic methods of doing it. And when we're talking about, well, Guy, you started to talk about a situation where there's a blended set of services where the architect of record may not be influencing the design greatly, but is involved in the beginning of the project, and the design architect, who may be responsible for design, is still involved to see it through to the end and make sure that the design is executed. That seems like a good collaborative way to work. What are the problems that you have had with that, though? You're on mute, Guy. Sorry.
It's interesting. We gravitate towards that method. I mean, and I would say maybe 40% of our practice by revenue gets done in this manner. We are perfectly capable and frankly happier doing the projects start to finish. So, we are reluctant to take on, and rarely do take on, a project where it's a more strict handoff, and we're not involved in overseeing and opining on the development of the CDs and being there during construction. We like to make buildings, we like to see them built, and we want to be part of that process. Where there have been pressure points, those are varied and happen from time to time. It usually is, for us, is when there might not be a level of expertise with the local firm in how to detail, a complex, whether it's wall system or a structural system that they might not have been familiar with. In those situations, though, we really look to try and work together as partners where there are gaps in the knowledge. We try and work with the firm, and at the end of the day, make sure that the client and the project get everything they need to be successful.
Tara, it sounds like maybe your firm has had more experience with this strict handoff kind of situation, and it sounds like your group has been on both sides of it, both as the design lead and also as the architect of record expected to carry it through. Any feeling about which way works better than the other?
Well, actually, I'm with Guy. We do some with the strict handoff, but I would much rather see us, if we're the AOR, I would rather see us involved at the beginning, and have that continuation of services. I'll compare it to when we talk to owners about whether they should do a traditional design bid build and have that, one set of documents that everybody's going to bid from versus having the CM involved early on and a more collaborative approach where you're going to get that input and that expertise of the other party throughout the process. And we'd rather see it with that blended model. But there are times where maybe it's a process where they've hired an architect early on to do a design, and they knew that they were going to maybe do fundraising or something after that point, and then they were going to put it out to other architects to complete the project. And so the biggest challenges with that for us have been not knowing what you're going to get when you get that set of documents and to what level of completion it's at, and understanding what you're going to have to add to that to get it to that full over the finish line in terms of a full set of construction documents. And then not having that background knowledge of what the other firm did, and what they knew and understood, what conversations they had with the owner early on. Maybe they had conversations with the authorities having jurisdiction or the neighborhood, or it's just not having all of that history. And so there are ways you can alleviate that. Maybe they can even arrange a meeting between the parties that the owner can bring everybody together in one room and facilitate that handoff, so you can at least ask those questions and have that ability to learn the history that you weren't, privy to throughout the process.
Sal, I know you've said that this is not a big part of your practice, but have you ever been in a situation where you were handed a design that somebody else did and asked to carry it through to the finish?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to add, I think that is where the problems can occur. And the last case that's happened to us was, and we didn't talk about this before, but where the owner was just unsatisfied with their original architect and cut ties with them and handed us a DD package, and we'll say that loosely. It looked like a DD package, and just handed it to us and said, "Here you go. You're now the architect of record. Take it from here." And there's a lot to be desired there. It's very, very difficult to pick up on what the design intent was many, many times. So that's a totally different animal than what we've talked about before. But I want to go back to a couple of things that you addressed with the matrix, the responsibility matrix. So I think was really important. If there's anything in my eyes that came out of these new documents, is that matrix is so valuable to somebody like me in a small firm who does not have a lot of experience using our own responsibility matrix, because we really didn't have any. As I think Guy and Tara said, there's a lot of marriages that have been set up in advance, and they can be problematic. So when you have that, I think this matrix solves a lot of issues that we had problems with before, and would clear it up and eliminating a lot of the gaps and understanding each other's responsibilities. So that matrix is very, very important to somebody on my level. And the handoff, just opposite of what Guy just said, from my end as a small firm, the handoff can be problematic in the sense that when there is the design architect is still involved and stays involved, they give us a package that is very loose, and they don't want any more involvement. Here's the design, and we're trying to do maybe a late DD package or even the CD package for the client, and there's not a lot of information. So we have to detail those things that are important to somebody like I on our own, with very little oversight from the design architect, if any. And that's what I mean about mutual respect, where Guy's firm would come in and help us do those things and make sure the design intent is intact. We're given no guidance other than our own, so we're off and running. So there's the problems that we see that on our end as being potentially the AOR in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I'll talk about a situation that our firm runs into from time to time that's not quite on point, but it's close enough to be relevant. Mm-hmm. We consider ourselves primarily a design firm, but we are from time to time asked to be a local AOR type representative here in New Orleans where we practice. And where we run across that situation frequently is in hospitality, hotel design, where a major chain or flag may have a roster of interior designers that they like to work with who know their brand standards, and they are confident can execute. But then if they're building in a specific location, they need an architect, a licensed architect, licensed in that jurisdiction to execute the project and make sure that the design is permittable and construction documents, and handle the procurement process and construction administration, that kind of thing. So that's the situation where our firm has most encountered this kind of hard handoff transfer type situation. And you're right. It largely, the success of the project largely relies on the quality of what you get from the design architect or the interior architect on this, and it varies in quality and completeness. And that makes me want to go back to something Guy said in the very beginning of this, which is that design doesn't end at a phase. Design carries through and permeates through the development of the detailing at a detail level. And so we find sometimes working with the interior architects, as we begin to adapt their thoughts, their design intent to something that's constructible, we're in a situation where we have to make what could be considered in some cases fairly major design changes. And the challenge there is to understand how to communicate back to them, make sure that we have their buy-in, and build their trust that we're the curators of the design and are really trying to put our own design eye and design skills on it to carry it through, to see it through to their original intent. And I think that in those situations, we have something that is more like this dual prime situation. Usually, neither of us is a consultant to the other. We're both working directly for the owner. We're in this kind of codependent situation, and we have to communicate with each other and find a way to do business together and communicate together, or else we both fail our client, and neither of us looks good.
I would just add, to the owners listening in on this conversation, it clearly is a complex way to deliver a project, but it's not so formidable that it should be shied away from. I think there are some tried and true ways to ensure success, and one of the ones that I turn to, we've touched on it in a number of ways earlier, is just the rigor of process. Starts out having clear expectations among both the parties of what they're doing, how they're going to work together, and that process follows a schedule that the owner has the ability to manage, to make sure that first and foremost there is collaboration, and as Sal and Tara both said, the foundation of that is clear and regular communication, but having the structure of a schedule and a process where that the parties are talking, are reviewing each other's work. And I would advise owners, even in a scenario with what we call a strict handoff, consecutive and not concurrent services, I would still urge there to be, you know, a handoff that involves direct contact between the design architect and the architect of record that's going to be taking that to the finish line, so that, you know, more than just handing them a set of drawings, there really is a more in-depth opportunity for them to hear from the client and their design architect what their expectations are, what's embedded in that design, what's important, what's secondary, and so forth.